Okay, guys, welcome back to the channel. I know you're asking if you looked at the thumbnail. What the heck is Michael Fremer doing on my channel? Is this going to be a digital versus analog debate? No, actually it's not. Well, first of all, if you don't know who Michael Fremer is and have lived under a rock for the last 40 or 50 years, he's one of the biggest icons in the industry, especially in the analog vinyl realm. Accredited reviewer, needle mover, you name it. So much experience in the vinyl realm that pretty much everybody knows who he is. He focuses on that almost exclusively and has a great website, The Tracking Angle, you should check out. And I've featured some of his writers in the past. Great group of press. But he commented recently on a video. The whole thing that precipitated this was my visit to Joe's system that you saw, that esoteric system with the spatials and the tube amps and the Rockport linear with the linear tracking Tonearm. And both Joe and Charles Kirmuss of Kirmuss Record Restoration was in that video, and they were both espousing the benefits of linear tracking Tonearms. Now, Michael saw the video, saw that part, and decided to chime in with a contrary opinion. And instead of debating it in the comments, I invited him to come on as well with JR Boislclair of Wally Tools, another guy I've featured many times on the channel, unprecedented knowledge in this area, and they both share similar philosophies and research and know each other real well. I thought they could provide a counterbalance to what was talked about in that video, because I never want people to get too neurotic about generalities of linear tracking is always better than the pivoted Tonearms and vice versa. And what this will do will give some perspective from other experts in the hobby and what in the technical side they think is some problems with linear tracking. And then also I kind of bring it back to, hey, there's a lot of tech talk on both sides. What does this mean to our ears? Can you get great performance from both? And not to spoil anything, because we talk about this, you know, you can get great performance from both, and it's not a case of getting neurotic about one or the other. But I do want to provide this balanced information from experts for a couple of reasons. Number one, you can see what resonates with you, what rationale and tech talk works with you, but also it's a macro point in the hobby, regardless of what topic you're talking about. Number one, first of all, never trust. A big red flag is people that claim to know everything, and we talk about this as well. That's a big problem in the hobby, on the forums and whatnot. Find true experts, and even people that have a lot of experience, like all the people's perspectives that I showed, they can disagree as well. So getting multiple opinions, just like going to the doctor, getting second opinions. This is where you advance in the hobby. And this is what my channel is all about, presenting you true experts, people that can give you good information, not just anonymous sock puppet stuff motivated by other reasons in the hobby. So this is a great video for me to share with you, even though it's not in my wheelhouse. I'm totally agnostic to the topic, but it was so enthralling to me to dive into the details, and I think there's a lot of value for you, even if you don't have a turntable. So enjoy this Zoom, and I'll be back more with maybe some outtakes as well from this. Enjoy, guys.
How is everybody?
Good.
Are we doing just a live stream, or are we just recording it?
No, I like to record it, and then I'll share it with you, and then you can decide if there's anything you may want to edit out or anything like that.
I've never worried about that.
I don't do that either, but I give that option to anybody just because.
Yeah, it's not
JR requires
not a problem.
That's right.
I'll make this. Right. I'll make the thumbnail that.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, yeah, usually it's only JR I have to edit out. You know, he's got a face for radio, so I have to do filters and all kinds of stuff.
Okay.
You got some people in the background. Are they going to be joining us too, JR?
No, that's my wife's office, so that's where she works.
Okay.
Should I blur it out?
No.
Right.
The more the better.
All
Yeah,
right.
I only invited you two. I know Charles has the competing position, but what I thought was valuable for this Zoom is kind of to be a counterpoint to the video that I guess brought attention to this issue, where it, you know, was pretty adamant in that video that linear tracking Tonearms are, quote, better or superior. And I never like to have general dogmas that are, you know, generalized. You know, the devil's in the details and the nuances. And knowing, even in that video, I think you may have heard me say, I'm sure there's others that disagree, and they're welcome to chime in, which you happen to chime in Michael and then JR as well. I knew his position was probably a little bit different. So what I really want to do, I thank you guys for joining me, but I wanted to just give you guys a chance to at least provide some perspective and provide those devil in the details kind of things that maybe pluses and minuses. Because, I'm predisposed to you guys' expertise. I'm totally agnostic. I'm a digital guy.
Right.
But I'll try to play a little bit. I'm not going to be the devil's advocate because I'm not even an expert enough to do that. But I'll try to give you the tough questions. So tee it up for you guys to pretty much give me your perspective. But I definitely trust you guys' experience and expertise and think it's going to be valuable to share that as a counterpoint or as an addendum to what was covered in that video.
I would say your idea is extremely good. It's a good idea to trust us. We are trustworthy and knowledgeable.
And if you don't believe me, just ask me.
Just ask. Okay.
Exactly. And we are not dogmatic.
Okay.
And we're not advocate. I don't advocate any. If you like something, that's what you should like. But know what it is and know what it is you like, and know that nothing in this hobby, nothing is perfect or the last word on anything. That's the important thing.
Yeah, you won't hear Michael, I don't know, maybe you did years ago, but I don't think you do it now, ever say, this is the best product out there, for example.
I don't. I could say it's the best I've ever heard.
Yes,
that leaves open the entire world of products I haven't heard. When people come out and say this is the best there is, or I hate that. I mean, I really dislike it.
Yeah.
No, I mean, and that's part of what the point of this video is, to provide perspective. I didn't want it to go overboard. People getting neurotic watching that last video thinking, oh, I don't have a linear tracking. I need to get a linear tracking Tonearm now. Really wanted to just focus on the technology and your guys' experience in terms of maybe just starting with even some newbies, what the difference between a straight line tracking, a tangent, explaining that in general first, and then maybe getting into the devil details of what may be pluses and minuses.
Are you on now? So this is part of the show?
Yeah. It automatically records from the start. So
all right. So you want me to start, JR? I'll start.
Please.
Right. So when records are cut on a lathe, the cutting stylus, if it's inserted correctly into the chuck, that's a big if, but hopefully it is. It describes a line, a tangential line that's perpendicular to the grooves all the way across, and that has to be that way, and that's the ideal way to play it back as well. If it could be done perfectly, that would be the ideal way to do it. But to compare a cutting head, which is a big heavy thing that's driven by a screw across the surface, and a playback stylus, which is a lightweight thing, they're not comparable. So ideally, you'd want to play it back that way. But there are serious problems involved in this. And first of all, while it looks great, it looks tangential in our world, which is way out here, when you get really close up, a lot of things are going on that are preventing it from actually being tangential to the groove all the way across. And these things are what we want to discuss and make sure people understand. So the first thing is, let's take an air bearing. So I've owned the original Eminent Technology air bearing arm. I own the ET2. I've owned a Rockport arm. Now, the Rockport arm happens to be the best arm that you can get in terms of a air bearing arm. And that is because if you think about it, and you don't have to be an expert on the subject to understand this. So the way an air bearing works is a captured air bearing. There's different kinds. There are captured air bearings, and there are these floating, there's kind of these floating things that float on a cushion of air. That's like a magic carpet ride. That's another problem. So there's all different types of tangential trackers. So the best air bearing arm is a captured air bearing, where the bearing is completely surrounding the rail that it's riding on, and there's a work zone in there. It's called the work zone. It's where the pressure is very high in order for the bearing to move. It has to be very, very high. When it gets to the annular gap, it has to go immediately down to the ambient air pressure in your room. So it's got to go from high pressure to low pressure. So what do you think happens at that gap? Blow up a balloon and let go of it. And what happens? It's going all over the place, because that's what happens. And so a typical air bearing, fixed air bearing arm, at the annular gap, it's oscillating at an extremely high frequency. And you can hear that. So, for example, the Kuzma arm, which is one of the better air-bearing arms, has no compensation for the fact that the air pressure is going from high to low at that gap. So the arm is oscillating at a very high frequency, and you can't see it, but you can hear it if you have one of those arms. If you like that sound, that's fine. But that's one problem with this type of arm. The only tangential tracking air-bearing arm that deals with that properly is the Rockport that you showed in your video. And that has what's called a groove compensated bearing that was designed by a gentleman named, I think his name was Tim Sinclair. I may have his name. He's passed away, so he doesn't live anymore. But he designed machine tooling for the nuclear weapons industry. And so he kind of knows what he's doing. You can't make a mistake in that world. And so it's a groove compensated air bearing where the air pressure goes from high pressure to ambient air pressure gradually between the work zone in the center and the outside. But it's the only one that exists that way. So every other air bearing arm has a problem in that regard. It's oscillating at a high frequency. And there are two kinds of those arms. There's the air bearing that's stationary and the rail moves. And there's the air bearing where the rail is stationary and the bearing moves. And the Rockport is the kind where the rail remains stationary and the bearing moves. And that's the best kind. The Eminent technology moves the whole rail. So this enormous mass, this enormous horizontal mass is going back and forth. That is not good. And you, Jerry, you want to get involved right there, or should I keep going? Because I'll just keep going.
Oh, you're on a roll, man.
Okay, I'm on a roll. So the Eminent technology arm, the entire rail is moving. And that's a high horizontal mass moving back and forth. So the tail is wagging the dog. And Bruce Thigpen, who designed that bearing, ended up putting the counterweight on a spring to reduce the mass at the back of the arm, and that's helped somewhat. But it's a seriously flawed design. And so, but it is an air-bearing tone arm, and it does track tangentially despite the problems.
Yeah.
The other kind of air bearing is the floating air bearing. And you've seen these where there's like a rail with holes in it. And the bearing is not captured. It's like a magic carpet ride. It's floating along.
Two horizontal planes,
Yeah.
right? One's stationary and one's floating, right?
Right. So the arm is floating. And when it's floating, it's moving. It's moving this way. And it's moving this way. It's moving. It has to move. It can't be held stationary. And you can hear that as well. And some people like that sound and they don't really know what they're listening to, but they like it and that's fine. So I've done demos for people where I will take a recording that I've made with that kind of arm. I do the end of Rhapsody in Blue with Audiophile and the Boston Pops, a very famous RCA living stereo. And I record it using an arm, a turntable that has one of those floating magic carpet ride air bearings. And then I do it with a proper pivoted arm. And at the end of the record, where you have the most distortion on a pivoted arm is right at the end of the record. And I say, which do you like better? And almost everyone says they like the air bearing better. They go, it's a giant soundstage. Look how big that's. It's an enormous picture in a soundstage. And I say to them, that is true. Now, I want you to listen to the instruments on the soundstage and tell me what you hear. And when they listen to it, they hear the focus of the instruments on the soundstage, as you would hear live in a concert, is very tight and focused on the pivoted arm. You hear the timpani, you hear the strings, you hear everything in focus. And the air bearing, which produces this enormous soundstage, everything is out of focus. It's just enormous because the whole thing is moving as it plays it back. And that's a lesson learned for people who want to learn about this. So I'll stop right there and say that's one kind of bearing. And I won't stop right now. I'll keep going. So I'll keep my bearings. So I own the original Eminent technology arm. I saw it at a hi-fi store in Santa Monica, California in about 1980, 83. And they said, look, it's perfect. It's an air bearing and this arm just floats. There's no friction and it's tangential. And I said, I'll take it. And so I bought it and I put it on a Oracle turntable. An Oracle turntable is a sprung turntable. It's a 3-spring suspended turntable. And so the stupidest thing you could do is put that arm with the moving rail on a suspended table, a 3-point table, because as that rail moves, a large weight is moving across, and when it gets as it moves, it's depressing the springs at the back. So the whole table is doing this. I mean, it's the stupidest thing I could have done, but I didn't understand all of those things at the time. So, that's when Harry Weisfeld at VPI designed a 4-poster. So he specifically designed a 4-post turntable so that it would take an ET arm and it would float back and forth without deflecting. And that was a good idea. Okay. So that's the air bearing design with lots of problems.
There's more than that, though, in terms of isn't there like a servo type design and a techniques type?
Yes. So this is a servo design. That was Goldman had the original servo, one of the original, and there was also one from B&O. And so what that arm would do is it would go across, and then there were like LEDs that would read as the arm went out of tangency, a light would go off and say, "Oops, you're out of tangency," and it would move the arm back, and then it would be fine, and then it would move. So it's crabbing its way across the record. That's inevitable. So, and it can sound fine, but it's not tangential to the groove. So a lot of these arms are actually describing tiny little arcs across the whole record and creating distortion, LTE, tracking error all the way across the record in tiny little increments. And that's not good either. That's very bad. So that's a bad system as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want to chime in on anything on that?
Yeah. So, okay. Well, and there's also pivoted linear bearings, and we can talk about that too. But I have, it is true that if we could make the perfectly designed tone arm, that we'd be better off having maintaining a linear path of that style.
Straight line. Yeah.
Tangential to the grooves.
Yeah.
I like to call it
I'm going to argue that one. I'm going to argue that no, we don't necessarily want to be tangential to the groove. Why?
Why?
Because we could have zenith error. And this is the big lie that people live, for the most part, with tangential trackers, is that if you've got a Japanese stylus, your average zenith error out of the hundreds of cartridges we've analyzed, your average zenith error is about 3.2 degrees. So you might as well have your cantilever off by 3.2 degrees.
You have to explain what the zenith error is.
Yeah, that's one thing that people are probably not understanding.
And
the cantilever could be right.
He's got Godzilla-sized stuff. I can show you this.
Okay, yes. All right. So this is a fine line contact stylus. And the part of the stylus that touches the groove will be on either side of this apex. So say left channel contact edge is right about there, and right channel contact point is right about there. Now, if we draw, when we align our cantilever, when we setting up our cartridge to begin to listen to it for the first time on our Tonearm, we align the cantilever at the null point on our protractor.
We have to explain the null. Should I do that?
I'll do the null point. This is true. Thank you. So the null point is one of two locations across the surface of the record when you're using a pivoted Tonearm, where the cantilever can be perfectly tangential to the groove. Okay? Only 2 points across the whole record. Everywhere outside of those two locations across that travel area, it is to some degree or another out of alignment. Okay? And that's what linear trackers avoid. However, when we align the cantilever at the nod point, we're doing it in the faith that these two contact edges, if you've drawn a line between them, is perpendicular to the cantilever. But
because you have to say, because we assume when they insert that stylus into the I call it cantilever, he calls it cantilever, whichever it is, that it's inserted so that the two contact points are perpendicular to the cantilever, and we made that assumption for decades and years until this guy came along with a big microscope and proved it not true.
Yeah, and not true to a large degree, right? So of the three major manufacturers of these stylus cantilever assemblies in the world, two of them I know for sure, their tolerance, the degree to which their product is acceptable on the Zenith Error is plus minus 5 degrees. Now I've seen as much as 17 and a half, and that was on a multi-$1,000 cartridge, right? So if you've got, so here's the cantilever, my forearm, and we want for this edge to be perpendicular to the cantilever. But if it's like this, significant zenith error, you'll never know it, first of all. It'll still sound good. I want to make that clear. It'll still sound good. It won't sound nearly as crystal clear as it should. Separation of instruments won't be nearly as good as it should be. What other things did you experience for yourself? Because I know you've experienced correcting this.
I have experienced it. I installed one in a guy's system recently, and when I went to his place to install it, I forgot to bring your gauge for correcting.
Making that correction.
So, if you buy a $5,000 cartridge, you can send it to JR, and I'm not promoting his service. I am promoting his service because it's fantastic, but I don't get paid for promoting it. If you pay me, I would appreciate it. But no, so he gets it, and for a reasonable amount of money, he will send you back a report showing how far off, if it is, from tangential the stylus has been inserted into the cantilever, and then he gives you a gauge that will allow you to compensate for the error. So the point he's making, really, let's get right to the point. You can have a tangential tracking tone arm. The odds that your stylus is really tracking tangential to the groove is probably no.
That's
not
right.
happening.
That's right. In fact, I can quantify it. 81.2% of cartridges have zenith error that's audibly correctable. Okay.
So the best you can say is these tone arms that are very expensive and have other problems we haven't even talked about are probably mistracking in terms of linear tracking error all across the whole surface of the record.
Yeah. So you're paying for a benefit you don't even know you're not even getting, right? Second thing, but it's correctable if you know what your zenith error is. And I've even, with the Wally Zenith tool, I've now created instructions for you to listen for it. But you have to use a specific record to do that.
Which he makes and sells for a lot of money.
No, I don't. I don't make and sell. No. Chad does that. Okay. But we measured it, and that one has 0 cutting zenith error, right? So
you should explain that to me before you go any further. The fact that you've measured test records and found what'd you find?
So we've measured multiple test records, and we found the degree to which cutting engineers have to insert that cutting stylus into the chuck. But they can do it with a cutting zenith error so that the cutting edge isn't properly aligned to the groove, to the radial line. All right. So they could do it they could cut this way, the whole way across, which induces what we call cutting zenith error. This is why test records, and I've seen as much as about 3.5 degrees cutting zenith error in a very highly respected laboratory test record, is why all test records should be held with some suspicion, because there's not one yet on the market that I am aware of, and I've got a stack this high of different laboratory test records, not one yet that's ever been issued with a declaration of here's what our known errors are, and here's our limit of error measurement. None of them have done that. Right. So
Jared, pause for 1 second. And because people are now saying, I know the digital people are saying, why do you play records? This is terrible. What's the matter with
my job to jump in later for that. But
yeah. Well, so and then the next line of thinking is, well, then all of that cutting zenith error can be in all of our musical records, and the answer is absolutely correct. It can. However, the degree to which the cutting engineers can err is equally likely clockwise versus counterclockwise. And if you were to take a tabulation of all the known error in any number of records and tabulate them on a graph, it would be a beautiful distribution curve with the bulk of all records where they should be. So that's where we aim. It's a statistical problem, right? We just aim for the mean. That's it. Now, can I move on to my other problem with linear trackers?
Yeah, because I think the zenith error can apply to both tones anyway.
It certainly can.
So
absolutely.
let's go ahead.
Absolutely, it can.
It's
and wait,
before you go on,
if the head shell on the tangential tracking arm only has holes, so you cannot adjust that
Yeah.
cartridge in the zenith angle, then
To
you're
correct it.
finished. You're
Yeah.
stuck. But because
Yeah.
the guy that designed that tone arm figures, well, the cartridge is perfect, so you don't,
Ah,
my arm is perfect, so you don't have to do any adjustment. So you're stuck.
yeah. There's even some pivoted arms that have holes, and I'm
Yes,
sorry, but that's problematic.
very
It really
problematic.
is. Yeah.
Okay, now
Um,
I'll shut up. Go.
so the other problem that, and Michael already alluded to this with regards to air bearings, but it also applies, in my opinion, to the pivoted linear tone arms that I have seen, is that there's a lot of bearing slop. Now, I've done videos on what's like the microscopic world of analog, where I discuss what's the minimum perturbation of the groove wall, the smallest amount of undulation in the groove wall that we can ultimately listen to either through speakers or headphones. And the answer is in the very, very low nanometer range. That that's infinitesimal. That's below the wavelength of violet light. That's way down there, right? Now, to my understanding, even the best ABAC bearings allow 3 to 5 microns of slop. Now, a micron is 1,000 times bigger than a nanometer, right? So what we want is very rigid. The bearings have to be rigid, but not have friction, right? If the bearings allow a lot of slop, then there's an opportunity for the groove content to modulate the tone arm. And if the tone arm is moving about, well, that's going to create its own signal right back to the cartridge motor, which,
And you don't see that because it's
no,
tiny.
you don't see that. No way, right? So I've never seen any truly captured bearings in any of these designs. And the more bearings, even if they are great bearings, the more you offer, the more opportunity for slop you offer as well. There is I just haven't seen any linear bearing or linear track or pivoted or linear bearing at all. Certainly in the case of magnetic design or air bearing design, the degree to which they can slop about within the low micron range is a lot. Even
Yep.
if it's a high pressure air bearing, it might be very difficult to say move that bearing, say a full millimeter, but within a few microns, tons of opportunity, right?
You know what the other funny thing is? If you use a ball bearing, like an ABEC ball bearing, which is tiny little bearings in a channel, and you can spin it. Some of these arm manufacturers go, "Let me show you how good my bearing is." Whee! And they spin it around, and it spins around, it spins around, and they go, "See how good that is?" And then think about it. What's happening on an arm? The arm is moving like that. It's moving a tiny, tiny bit this way, and it just slowly. All the spinning is useless. It's the most.
It
It's like
doesn't tell you anything
it's
about, yeah,
ridiculous. It means
yeah,
nothing. It's what you need is a bearing that is able to move very quickly without friction in a very tiny, tiny amount. That's what you need. So
yep, yeah, yeah, and only in the axis which it's designed to move, not in
exactly.
other axes, which is what most all of them do to some degree or another. Now, so this isn't just a problem limited only to linear tone arms. We can see plenty of tone arms that are pivoted that have lots of bearing slop. But the best tone arms, best sounding tone arms out there, those bearings are captured beautifully, right?
Yep.
But listen, and I want to make clear, you've already mentioned this, and I want to say it too. Just because you have a linear tracker doesn't mean it's not going to sound good. It can sound great.
Right.
But the types of distortion that a loose, say a linear tracker that does exhibit these loose bearings that I'm talking about, there's a particular signature and that sonic signature that they create, and it is this ethereal, large soundstage. And that is a function of things getting sloppy in the arm. And
It's an airy soundstage, just like the real world when you go to concerts. There's a lot of air in the room. That's what you're
yeah, You might like it though, and if you like it, fine. But I can tell you
Exactly.
this, mechanically, it's not true to the groove content. It's
Well,
not.
I mean, yeah, I want to jump in real quick because a lot of people, this is going to be over their head. Some of them, it's going to be music to their ears, understanding stuff in the weeds, which a lot of my subscribers like. But also, it's important for me to bring perspective. Bottom line, some people may become neurotic that they have linear tracking now based on what you guys are saying. And I didn't want the opposite to happen with the other video. So maybe using you guys' experience getting down to the nuts and bolts of sound quality, really how much difference are we talking about among the best linear tracking sound quality wise? I know you've talked about at the end of the record some different nuances, but generally speaking, how close are the two from a standpoint of giving reference quality the best that vinyl can offer?
I've owned the Rockport arm, and I think it's the best tangential tracking air bearing arm because it has that groove compensated bearing. The only issues we have to talk about, which we haven't talked about, is the vertical and horizontal resonant frequency, which we should talk about in a minute. So the best of the air bearing arms, like the Rockport, has to me the best sound staging. It's got the least amount of slop in the bearing. But it's got a bass problem, which we can talk about why it has a bass problem. So you want to do that now, or you want to, I think we both think a pivoted arm. We both have concluded that a straight, properly designed pivoted arm, whatever amount of distortion it adds, is minuscule and minor compared to the distortion the rest of your system is adding to the music, even though when you look on a piece of paper and it shows, oh, there's this distortion at this far across the record, there's that distortion, then there's no distortion all the way down there, but up here it's got to be terrible. You don't really hear that so much.
Yeah,
JR.
I think what the problem that linear trackers are trying to fix, so far anyway, I think that the cure is worse than the disease.
Okay.
That's
So
been my experience too, and I've owned them. I've owned a lot of them, and so let me just. I just want for 2 seconds. I want to go into the resonant frequency issue.
yeah,
So and here's what I'm not a scientist, and I don't even flame it on television, but uh, a spring mass system has a resonant frequency. So you drive a car, it's got a spring in the car, a spring suspension, and the car weighs a certain amount. When you drive along on a road and you hit a bump, the car is going to react, and there's a shock absorber in there too, but it's going to bounce a little bit. If it's a softly sprung car, it's going to bounce and then settle down. So every spring mass system has a resonant frequency, and the ideal resonant frequency for a Tonearm cartridge combination, and the cartridge is the spring because it's got a cantilever that's got an elastomer suspension, and the arm is the mass. You want that resonant frequency to fall between 8 and 12 hertz. Why is that? Because below 8 hertz, you get warp wow. Records are not pressed concentrically, so they're going to be off a little bit. So the arm is going to move back and forth, and they're very rarely totally flat, and there's going to be a micro amount of vertical movement. So you want the frequency to be above that warp wow, between below 8 hertz. Otherwise, you excite that, and it gets into the music. The lowest frequency that we record is a 16 hertz organ stop pedal, which is 4 below what digital does, but I don't want to get involved. So if the resonant frequency is above 16 hertz, it's going to really mess up the music really badly. So you want it between 8 and 12. So a pivoted arm, the mass is going to be the same vertically and horizontally, and the resonant frequency is pretty much going to fall within the same range. A linear tracking arm where you have a large horizontal mass moving and a much smaller vertical mass moving, the resonant frequencies are going to be different. So the issue with the Rockport arm was always that I could never get the kind of bottom end slam I wanted because the horizontal mass was different than the vertical mass. And when Andy Perry decided, he tried to do it in a way that the frequencies did not mess up the sound of the arm, but I never could get the kind of slam and bottom end that I get from a good pivoted arm.
That's good
So,
information to have a subjective sound quality comparison.
and
spring
here's
system.
I just did a thing at Audio Advice in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I brought this along and I hung two different weights from this spring to show that a heavier weight had a resonant frequency that was like that, and a lighter weight had a resonant frequency like that. And there are test records that are pretty accurate that you can get for people out there who have a pivoted arm that they want to check their resonant frequency. You can buy this test record, and you literally see the arm shaking at the frequency that it's resonating at. And if you don't see that, it's telling you that the resonant frequency of your system is in a bad place. It's either above 16 hertz or it's below 8 hertz, and you should do something about that. Like put a penny or a nickel on the top of the head shell, and that will no,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
okay. Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and just say, would it be fair to say, though, that tangential tracking arms and that technology, because it's been maybe easier to implement and maybe less costly to engineer, it's benefited from a lot more engineering acumen and effort over the years? Could potentially down the road, linear tracking could those issues you brought up be addressed with the right amount of technology, or do you think it's a non-starter?
I think the horizontal and vertical resonant frequency issue is not solvable. You know who tried to solve that? The Versa Dynamics turntable, John Bick's Versa Dynamics turntable tried to solve that problem. He had a vestigial arm that was this long. So for insecure men, it's a big problem. The arm is only that long. And when it moved up and down, even a slight amount,
oh yeah,
it's a big problem because you're
big
changing,
change.
everything is. Yeah, it's a big problem. But he tried that just to limit that issue. And so I'm not sure there's a solution to that.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a non-starter, but I've noodled this one over pretty hard myself, and I'm having difficulty seeing how you could, certainly for a linear bearing as opposed to linear pivoted, a linear bearing, I just don't see how it would be done and not offer way too much slop. In a linear pivoted, I think there's more hope, much more hope.
Yeah.
I would like to say, just because I can hear one of my fellas on our research team, he would definitely want to say something at this point. He's an engineer, PhD, he's very accomplished, and he's a exclusively headphone listener, exclusive vinyl listener, listens at very highest levels with regards to the quality of his equipment. And he's got this real sensitivity to tracking error. He can hear it, and he actually was one of the people who taught me. I'm going to show you what it sounds like, which is difficult to do on a record because you play at the null point, it's different music than if you play it elsewhere where you're going to have more tracking error, right? And indeed, yeah, you can hear the difference in how a pivoted tone arm will perform when that tracking error exists. He's very sensitive to it. I'm not as sensitive to it. And as far as I'm concerned, the fixes for that are worse than the cure. So
yeah, that's my
from what
conclusion.
I've heard, right, and from the designs I've seen, sometimes you can look at a design, right, Michael, and say, that I just don't see how that could work and not just be sloppy, right?
Like the well-tempered, which is a really interesting design, basically hangs the arm from a point, and there's like a nylon thread from this point, and then the arm is sitting in a tub of goo.
Yeah.
And it actually can sound pretty good. But until that tub of goo settles, you could be 10 records in before it really settles. And then the azimuth is going to be off through a lot of the record.
Yeah.
And there's another arm called the Super Track, which solves that problem. That's an amazing, absolutely amazing arm, and it's not expensive. But that's all. No, that's all. Story.
Yes. Yeah. And when I say not going to work, I don't mean, again, that it can't sound good. But it just cannot have faithfulness to the groove content. You can't have an arm modulating around without suffering, right? It's going to both add and cancel information, because if the arm's moving about in even the nanometer range, it's sending its own signal that ultimately comes through your speakers. That's not.
You've often, and I even have your 7 optimization points. I mean, you're talking about a nanometer, like, what is that, a thousandth of a millimeter?
A nanometer is a millionth of a
A
millimeter.
million that you can hear, basically, which brings up the digital analog debate and what Michael talked about. Who the heck does all this? You guys
It's
do, and you do it well. But I'm like, why the hell are we even
it's much
talking about
it's
this?
much finer. It's much finer than one of your 16 bits. I'll tell you that right now.
I'll give you that. But on convenience, cost, customization, it's just mind-boggling to me. But I do appreciate it, and I do actually have two things I wanted to share. Since we have some time, maybe to talk about pivoting from linear tracking. Part of that video talked about digital rips, and what I appreciated about, at least what I heard, is that I agree that certain LPs, and actually there's a site, I don't know if y'all know about, it actually looks at modern recordings, and the LPs, giving you guys food for your argument, actually have better dynamic range than the streaming version. He goes in there, and even some of the YouTube versions are better than streaming. So I do understand how just in the recording itself, the vinyl has some advantages, assuming you've got playback done, optimized the way JR talks about. I do understand that. But what I understood with what Joe was doing is still there's a noise floor issue with ticks and pops, which to me is remastering. As soon as I hear a tick and pop, it's a problem for me. I understand others don't. But what he's doing is taking those things out in a very meticulous way so that you get the advantage of digital from the noise floor perspective, but you do have that advantage, whatever advantages are in the vinyl mastering. What has your experience been with ripping, and any thoughts on that? I know we talked briefly, JR, about what you thought, but maybe worth us all talking about.
Well, I'll just say that if you clean a record properly, ironically, if you clean it properly with a good cavitation-based cleaner, and that would be Charles Kirmuss's machine, which
Kirmuss.
I said I wasn't going to use names, but here I want to use a name. You shouldn't really hear pops and clicks. I don't use it. I rip a lot, and people don't like that word to use rip. Apparently, people that's not what you should use, but I use it. If you rip a clean record, you don't hear pops and clicks on it. Go to my YouTube channel, trackingangle.com, and listen to Steely Dan's Gaucho recorded on a $370,000 turntable. And in 9624, using Vinyl Studio, and I use a Lynx Hilo A to D converter. And I never declick because I don't have pops and clicks on most of my records. And
Yeah.
Where there is an occasional pop or click, the better your turntable, the less you hear those things. And that's what people say, oh, your turntable is so sensitive. You hear every pop and click. No, because a less good turntable, the pop is going to create this huge ba-boom. A better one is the pop's going to be gone in a second because the thing is the turntable is not going to be amplifying it in itself. I'm not being as articulate as I would like to be on that, but that's what happens. So you listen to any of the vinyl rips that I have on my YouTube channel, none of them use a deep clicker. But if you listen to Gaucho on that, there's no digital version of Gaucho. And ironically, it is digitized, I know, but there's no version of Gaucho that will sound as good as that record digitized at 9624, which brings up the issue of DSD versus PCM. And I'm sure you get into that. Your world has that issue. There are people that say, if it's not DSD, I don't want it. And then there are people that say, it's got to be PCM because DSD has this noise shaping, and at the upper frequencies, it's all noise and it's horrible. And, it's to say you have the same problems we have. So.
Right. No doubt we do. And really, ultimately, I always bring it back to the delta in the sound quality. People can argue DSD, and then you can argue PCM, and then you play the same track. I can do it in my thing. They can't hear a tangible difference that changes their enjoyment. Ticks and pops, if I do hear ticks and pops, it does impact my enjoyment. But like you say, if you set things up right, clean the records, I have heard phenomenal sounding analog setups, and I appreciate that. On the other metrics that I talk about, from convenience, cost, customization, all that thing, it's still pretty digital for me. But in terms of those formats and the rips, JR, did you have any thoughts with Joe's rips? I think we talked a little bit about what you thought maybe part of the reason for sound quality impressions being better on the rip versus the original.
I'm trying to remember what I said. You know, I'm really a digital Luddite, so
Okay.
I don't feel like I've got a whole lot to add to this conversation. But I do remember saying something to you before that I thought was really clever, and now I don't remember what did I
I
No,
say?
I
don't see
think
I don't see why a digitized record would sound better than the live playback unless your RIAA equalization is superior in the digital domain than what you would be able to deliver in the analog domain. And there are people that advocate for digital RIAA because the filtering can be a lot more precise. So there are people that believe that. So in his system, perhaps that box that he uses that has the RIAA curve in the digital domain would be better than an analog RIAA filter. So my analog RIAA filter costs $75,000, my phono preamp. It's really good. It really is good. And it sounds better than the same music digitized through that filter and played back on a file. But if I had a better digital RIAA curve, maybe I'd have a different opinion. But I don't think so. I just think it's better live.
okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. Yeah. So, yeah, I think JR, you were talking about something similar to what Michael just mentioned, but you were talking about if the cartridge is not optimized and the meticulous process that Joe goes through with
Okay.
isotope,
Yeah.
he goes through much more than one button rip and not, he
Yeah.
massages it to almost a remastering level, such that if he is taking out some innate problems with the original LP playback in the recording, then that could be part of the reason we hear a little bit better on the rip versus the original.
Well, one bit of feedback I do often get from my clients who send their cartridge to me for analysis is that the groove noise has gone down.
Yep.
And I'm not I don't have an answer that I'm really confident in delivering as to why that should be so. I do know that as you change the orientation of the stylus and the groove, you will actually change the altitude in the groove that you read. So
Yes.
I might be taking you beyond the previous, garbage that you got down there, and now you're above it or you're below it, right? Um, there's some evidence to believe that when you get your VTA down, things will also get quieter. Um, but uh, I'm still not sure whether that's related to the comment I gave you the other day
Okay.
that now I can't remember. Yeah.
No, that's good. I mean, I just wanted this Zoom to kind of bring some perspective to what may be over exaggerated in terms of benefits of linear tracking, put some perspective not only to the technology and the tech stuff that you talked about, but also just sound quality wise. You shouldn't get too neurotic one way or the other if you're happy with what you've got. There is potential for both to sound good. At least I've heard them sound good. I really appreciated Joe's system with the linear tracking Rockport. I'm not a
Yep.
vinyl guru, but that's why I wanted to have you guys on, because you guys will give my subscribers much more real-time, extensive experience that they get on the forums. They're going to get a lot of bad advice. And in general,
There's so much.
Yeah.
There was there's a Facebook group. I won't mention it. It's a jazz group, and somebody asked what the best pressing of something was, and it was it was a Capitol record, and the guy says, "Oh, well, the best version is a 6i, which is a Columbia record. It's not even a Capitol." And another guy said, "Well, these are all the 78 RPM version is the best because these were originally 78 RPM records, and they weren't. They were actually recorded to tape, and then it came out on 78 RPM first because." At that point, there was not a micro groover. I mean, everything in this expertise list of things was wrong. Every single thing. There were like 8 different people chimed in on which the best version of this record was, and they were all wrong because they all were factually incorrect. There's so much bad information on the internets. It's mind-boggling.
no,
Yeah.
As
that's what.
opposed to here, where it's all correct.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's a lot of real bad information out there, and be careful of people who know everything. You
That's
know,
right.
um, I've said this before. I'm continue to be humbled at how much I don't know. The more I learn about this mechanical transcription.
We could talk about anti-skating and how wrong everything I told people about anti-skating turned out to be. I mean, I was doing the best I could, the most I learned uh, from our mentor,
Yeah.
Wally Malowich, who, taught me everything at the early days of this. And what skating turned out to be was not what he said it
Not
was.
not not quite there.
Not
Yeah.
quite there. And
Yeah,
JR
and
has
I
done
gotta give
tremendous research in that area and come up with a much better explanation of what it is, which over time will probably be wrong also. But for right now,
oh
it's
yeah,
right.
yes. Like I've made that proviso with listen to what I have to say now or not listen. I might correct myself in the future. In fact, I just finished recording a video in which I do just that. I tell you,
Yes.
okay, I'm advising this. I didn't used to do that, but we're learning. And listen, if we're going to keep up with digital, because digital is getting better, right? Clearly if we're going to keep up with digital, we better make sure that analog continues to get better. And there's
That's right.
plenty of opportunity for that as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, we're not there. We did a panel in Munich at the Munich high end in this year, and
Yeah.
we had a panel and we talked about can it get better? Is there more to get out of the groove? And we all agreed there is more. And the
Oh,
people who
yeah.
made these records in the 1950s had no idea what they were putting into the groove. They had no idea.
How good it
So
was,
much
really.
more.
Yeah.
Records that I've owned for 50 years, I play them. If I haven't played them in a long time and I put it on now, I don't know that record. I
Yeah.
don't know it. I'm hearing it for the first time. It's crazy.
Yes. Yeah. And I love hearing from you when you hear that same old record with a new product. And then I like to dive into, okay, what are the mechanical characteristics about this product that have allowed this to happen? And this is where all the discovery is, right? There's so many reasons to be optimistic about vinyl's future. And on the
And of
cutting,
course, the old records, a lot of those tapes either don't exist anymore or they're not in great shape. And a lot of are in great shape, like the blue notes that are cut from using Scotch 111. That tape is basically well, it's not bulletproof because if you shoot it, you'll destroy it. But it's lost very little over 50 and 60 years if you hear how those records sound. But a lot of tapes have deteriorated over time, and so a clean pressing that was properly made in 1950 or 1955 or 50 when stereo started, 58 or 9, can often sound better than a well done reissue from the same tape because the tape is deteriorated.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I guess you guys brought up a good point, that little part that I only like to feature people that are constantly learning. And it's a good parlays into what we were talking about with Charles Kirmuss. To your credit, Michael, you at first didn't, understand his system to be the best. And now it is one of the best. And this is the kind of intellectual honesty and learning curve I like to see in the hobby. And that's why
Yeah,
I like to bring people that are of this ilk already this high in terms of their knowledge and acumen, but continually learning and pushing the hobby forward. If things are going to be coming out that are better in the analog realm, you guys are going to be on the forefront of that or know about it pretty quickly. You're not the only great guys in vinyl, but
right.
I mean, at least I like to share, and that's why I wanted to do this Zoom as a counterpoint to what was talked about in the other video featuring Joe's great system and Charles's
Yeah.
opinion. He's probably going to have his own retort as well, and I'm happy to provide him audience for that too. But I think this gave a really good counterbalance to what was shared in that video.
Well, there's a guy out there on the internet who has a channel and he says, I've listened to 1,000 turntables and here's the best one. Look, I promise you, he has not listened to 1,000 turntables. And I went on his channel. I said, 1,000. I've listened to 1,000,000. Why stop at 1,000?
Right,
It's
right.
yeah. I mean, when you go to a room you haven't been into,
Mhm.
like this is the problem I have with audio shows or going over to your friend's house to listen to something. You'll often hear somebody say, "Oh, I'm going to go over to Joe's house to hear his cartridge, his preamp, whatever." No, you're not. You're going to hear everything. You're going to hear
That's
the
right.
acoustics. You're going to hear the setup. You're going to hear the system synergy or
Right.
lack thereof. What are you learning? I mean, the only way to if you can't get a particular product in your own home to listen to
It's
and
difficult.
truly understand how it works in your system, the only way perhaps to learn about it is to hear it in many, many, many different systems and then catalog what are the common characteristics in all these systems. And then you're just doing a statistical analysis. And
That's right.
how accurate will that be? Well, it'll be better than just listening to it at one person's place, right?
I like when guys bring over accessories. They come in my room. They don't. They're bringing it like they bring this little ball that they put under on a different piece of equipment, and they start playing records. They go, "Oh, my balls! I can hear my. Listen to how good my balls make your system sound." What are you talking
They're not even familiar with your system. Yeah, I know. It's a
And
charade
that's
that's
happened. That's happened. I'm not exaggerating. That has happened.
there is a big charade problem in this industry with people pretending they know stuff they don't and just
Yeah.
carrying on that charade. Um, but yeah, you guys are not part of that and part of the solution. So I'm glad to have you guys on. Real quick, I just realized I'm wearing a Gold Note shirt, and I wanted to ask you guys this because, again, I'm not a vinyl guy, but when I visited Gold Note in Italy a few months
Yeah.
ago, they are part of this vinyl alliance where they showed me this new green instead of vinyl press. What can you guys tell me about that? What do you know about that?
I have to do this video. I'm behind, but I'm going to do a video where I'm going to compare a regular hydraulically pressed record. That's how it's a hydraulic press that squeezes. It's like a waffle iron with an injection molded record. The same music, the same stampers. One is injection molded and one is hydraulically pressed, and one is PVC and one is made from recycled sea glass, bottles, plastic.
And
And
so it's using the same stampers?
I believe so. I believe
Hmm.
so. And the one that's from the injection molded doesn't use paper. It actually laser prints as soon as the record is injection molded. It laser prints the label. I've got it here someplace. I can't, but I'll have to get up and move to
And you think
find
that's probably this technology that Jason's talking about?
Yeah, it's an injection molded.
Yeah,
This one was
yeah.
green, and it's meant to be probably colored green because it's supposed to be more green from an environmental standpoint compared to vinyl.
This one is orange because it's a Trump supporter. So no, I'm not saying that. But it's orange. It's just an orange. It could be any color,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
So the first thing that goes through my mind when I hear about these two technologies is, and I know this is going to sound total geeky, but I want to know what the Young's modulus is of this new product versus regular vinyl. I want to hear that it's more rigid, not less rigid than vinyl. That's what I'm hoping to hear. If
all
it's
I want to hear, all I want to hear is the scream of the butterfly. That's all I want to hear. Oh,
the
it's a song
scream,
lyric.
that's it.
It's a
It
song
must be.
lyric.
It must be some acid-driven song lyric.
Most people who are acid driven will know what that song is, actually.
Okay, okay.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah. I was very
I'm in a giddy
impressed.
mood. I'm in a giddy mood.
Yeah, I was
Anyway,
just wanted to get you guys' opinion. I was very impressed with Gold Note as a company, and from
yeah.
the limited exposure I've had to their analog stuff, I've been very impressed with their phono stages, and then how instrumental they are into doing some of this stuff. So I'm going to have a video on that tour soon, but I
Oh,
thought I'd
cool.
get you guys' opinions on that, and if you've seen that yet, because it did look like it was promising. We heard a record that sounded really nice.
I've reviewed a few of his analog products, and they're very good. And he's invited me to Florence to visit tour the factory, and I just haven't had time, but I
Well,
would
bring
love
your
to.
swimsuit because they have a swimming pool inside the facilities.
Oh, nice.
And there's
Oh,
more artwork than there is equipment.
They
It's a
they know how to live.
beautiful,
They know how to live in Italy in ways that we don't here,
yeah,
and they know how to eat. And one of these days I'll get there. But the phono preamps I reviewed were very, very nice, and they're very serious products. So
cool.
yeah,
Yeah, well, we're coming up on an hour. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I think this was really good. Really, no
good.
editing necessary. You guys got, I think, some value to my subscribers in terms of giving some perspective to the other video. We'll see what the comments hold for us. If there's any questions, you guys are welcome to respond and do this again in the future. I guess everybody's probably looking at us originally and saying, oh, Jason's going to have a digital versus vinyl debate. But no, this
No,
is cool.
no, no. I like both. I have both. Now, can I plug a record?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so this is a record that I this is coming out. It's not quite out yet. This is Patrick Leonard. It all comes down to mood. Patrick Leonard produced for Roger Waters, Amused to Death, that everybody knows. He produced two of the last three Leonard Cohen records, all the early Madonna records, Elton John songs from the West Coast, and this is a prog rock record extravaganza. All analog synthesizers. Tony Levin's the bass player, Martin Barr and Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull are on this, and I am proud to say that I produced the vinyl and I get a credit on here. the vinyl shepherd. So this
Gosh.
record's going to go on sale. You can pre-order it now. It's sonically phenomenal, and Patrick wants this to be heard on vinyl. You can stream it now on Apple Music, I believe.
Oh, you
I
can
heard it
stream
on
it.
Spotify today. I like the music. I'm
Yeah,
definitely getting that
it's
record.
it's a wonderful. It's just I played it. If I haven't played it 100 times, I played it a thousand times on each thousand turntables that I reviewed, and it moves me. I played it for people at shows, and they tear up at the end.
Yeah.
And anyway, I'm done. I'm promoting my record. Okay.
What about you,
Congratulations.
JR? You have anything you've got new coming out, or anything you got shows
I've
coming
got
up?
I've got some secret weapons I'm working on.
Oh, okay. Well, you
Yeah.
just visited me to my place, but you didn't reveal any of that, so we'll keep it
No,
under.
His
no,
his
not
setup
yet.
tools are indispensable setup tools. I highly recommend his setup tools. I couldn't live without them. And
Almost
starting
all of my friends that have vinyl rigs have your setup tools and have Charles Kirmuss record cleaner and watch Michael Fremer's channel. So yeah, I'm
Well,
happy
and
to.
I will say that Charles's record restoration technique absolutely works. People are skeptical about that, but it works. It takes time to get a record completely clean. And what I'm gonna do is I have this Fairport Convention record called What We Did on Our Holidays that I bought in 1968, and I've been playing it ever since. And it's been cleaned with every cleaning fluid known to man, and it's been lasted, and it's probably got more layers of crud on it, but it still sounds great. And I'm going to record it, and then I'm going to go through the whole Kirmuss process and get all of it out of there and record it again. And I'm quite convinced that everyone will hear the difference, because I did it with my original Tommy and my Beatles White album, my British Beatles White album. When I reached a point where I said, I think this record is wearing out, because the music is further and further away. And then I did the whole thing, and a lot of stuff came out of that record. A moth flew out of it. It was unbelievable. And 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 then I played it. It was like it's back to new. So
Yeah,
It's really what it was like, eh?
the
Yeah.
moth, yeah, it was a good.
Not the moth. I mean, yeah, it
turned
was
into a
really
butterfly
revitalized
like
the
you
record.
wanted to hear.
Scream of the
Wanted to
Butterfly.
hear the
That's what I
butterfly.
did
Yes. So
when I
there we go.
liberated that moth. This is going overboard now at this
Well,
point.
it's a great way to end, because now we came back to you finally got your butterfly through Charles Kirmuss system, gave you the moth. Here we go.
Exactly.
That's right.
Well, thanks a lot, guys, for joining me. And like I said, feel free to comment on anything on the video when I release it. I'll give you guys a copy to review before I put it out. But it was a great time having you on.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting us and having the analog guys on, and to talk to your viewers. And I hope we've expressed our opinions without sticking it in anyone's ears where they can't have their own opinion that's different from ours. But I think we bring a lot of experience to this process, and
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you,
definitely.
Jason.
Thank you, guys. All right. Well, have a great night, and we will hopefully do this again soon.
okay,
Cheers.
bye-bye.
Hey, take
All
care.
right.
Bye.